Hello everyone, this is County Historian Lori Tippin. We've been doing a series on what we call the tiny towns and vanished villages of Putnam County. Today I'd like to talk about Montgomery Chapel, which became later Brick Chapel. We'll be looking at several maps and newspaper articles and so forth during this presentation. And if we're going too fast, and if I click the page too soon, you can always pause it. And then if I get ahead of you, you'd like to do left click and drag this little button back. You go to a previous slide. Let's go first to 1879 Putnam County Atlas, which shows in north of Greencastle, about 5 miles, in Monroe Township, a large cluster of communities, the old State Road 43. You'll see Montgomery Chapel Cemetery, school number 6, various other things. We're going to zoom on this later after we discuss it, but I want you to notice this crow that owned all this land up here, including parts of the area where the Montgomery Chapel and Montgomery Cemetery are located at school number 6. Then I'll ask the question here, try to answer the question. Montgomery Chapel, was that named after James Montgomery, who is the father-in-law of James Addington Montgomery OHara, an early settler? Or was it named after James Addington Montgomery OHara? Or because most of the settlers of the area came from Montgomery County, Kentucky? We're going to try to address that question. First, we're going to look at the National Registry application. The church and cemetery is on the National Registry of Historic Places, very significant designation for it to be so. You see the large brick church, which is now called Brick Chapel Methodist Church. And its application, the people that did the application, that contributed to the application, did a lot of research, a lot of work. So we're going to use that as a source to a certain extent as we go through this. And in the application, they go out saying that the Brick Chapel United Methodist Church and Cemetery sit atop a general rise overlooking a real stretch of US 231, 5 miles north of Greencastle, bisect the County Road 350 West. I think they meant 350 North. Remnants of the village of Brick Chapel line is short bypass leg. That's the old State Road 43. When 231 was put in, it was moved slightly to the west of the old State Road 43, but the old State Road 43 went right in front of the church, right in the front door. They said the cemetery then also spreads to the north and east of the hilltop, away from the church, uniform rows, and so forth, so on. Bigger burials began in 1839, include over 2,000 burials. Early stones visible, they include a description of some of the stones, the war veterans, they're buried there, and so forth, and the OHara family, including the marker placed in honor of Elizabeth Tribbett OHara, pioneer mother. Look at that stone, very, very large stone. And then zooming in on the so this is just north of the church, the cemetery, very prominent. You'd be blind if you miss it. Shows a kind of an engraving of her, which is really cool. The family went a lot of trouble to do this. It's very wonderful that they did so. And then Michael OHara, a description of him. And you can also read more about him, where he is buried, Hazel Green, Wolfe County, Kentucky, as a marker about Michael Green. We're going to include this information as we go, but if you want to pause and read it, you can. Very nice. If you're in that area, you want to stop by and see it. It's pretty cool. Continuing with the National Registry, the Brick Chapel United Methodist Church and Cemetery had its origins in 1822. In that year, George Elizabeth Howlett, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, settled and cleared land, built a cabin just north of present-day Brick Chapel. 1822 is very early in the county. The county was only just then organized. The house invited friends and neighbors to sell unfinished cabin to hear the Reverend Benjamin Jones preach a Methodist sermon. The Howletts, George and Susanna Jackson, Joseph Susanna Bruner formally organized a Methodist society in 1825, using the Howletts cabin as a meeting spot. The society was included in the Eel River Circuit, it's said, served by the Reverend Daniel Anderson. The church outgrew the Howlett place, and with community effort and spur, built a log cabin at the hilltop, the crossroads facing the Crawford Road in 1830. James Montgomery, a well-respected pioneer, donated the land for the church. So more than likely, the land for the church was named in his honor. And his son-in-law, James Eddington Montgomery OHara, helped build the log church along with many others. The church doubled as a schoolhouse in the 1830s. And the school was located on this site in the 1870s, according to Rural Atlas, probably the 1879 Atlas is what they're referring to. In 1834, the log church became too small, and the congregation built a 31 by 41 brick church closer to the crest of the hill, but not at the location of the current church. The members named the church Montgomery Chapel after one of the prominent leaders, James Montgomery. For 40 years, that brick chapel served the smaller original brick building, served the community, and people then became to know the place as Brick Chapel. Even though it's really Montgomery Chapel, they started to call it Brick Chapel after the brick building. And then they outgrew that building. And then in 1872, built the current building farther up on the crest of the hill, with James Eddington Montgomery OHara as major donor for the new church. George Jackson then was a brick mason. Now here's a close-up then. Let's go back to that 1879 house. We see the Montgomery Chapel and Cemetery in school number 6, which also was called the Crow School. If you read a book called Schools in Your Hand by the retired teachers of Putnam County, published, I believe, in 1976, it talks about the various schools, and they call the school number 6 the Crow School, probably after the crow that owned all that land in that area. But it's still called Montgomery Chapel, 1879, even though by this time the new brick building had been built. Then they called the Brick Chapel Post Office and Store, the Granger's own store. And then the steam sawmill and gristmill, another sawmill down here along that little stream. The old State Road 43 right in front of the building. 231 is now over just a little bit to the west. Let's talk about the James Eddington Montgomery OHara House, which is also on the National Registry of Historic Places. Two different views of the home. There's a photo of James Eddington Montgomery OHara, son of Michael and Elizabeth Privet OHara. And then this is from the National Register application. So they start out talking about the home itself. So it has this home has historic significance because of the structure and the design of the building, and because it's so old and it stood so long, and also because of the OHara family, very prominent. It says fronting US 231, the OHara House, a two-story brick I house built in Federalist style on a limestone foundation. It's built in two sections. The west wing originally was constructed about 1835. Then an east-west L was added or perhaps replaced in 1863. Again, they did a lot of research in this application. The study of the OHara family, again, this is part of the application, the National Register application. Is a mechanism of the settlement of Putnam County. James Eddington Montgomery OHara, his father, Michael OHara, came to America from County Down, Ireland, 1775, settled in Virginia, fought in the Revolutionary War. Shortly after the war, Michael O'Hara moved to what is now known as Jessamine County, Kentucky, and married Eleanor Hankins. After she died, he married Elizabeth Trivett, 1794, and then the O'Haras moved to Hazel Green in Wolfe County, Kentucky, where Michael O'Hara died. James Eddington Montgomery O'Hara was born in 1804, the sixth child of his father's second wife. At the age of 15, he was boarding and working with James Montgomery of Mount Sterling, Kentucky, serving as a laborer. Mount Sterling is in Montgomery County, Kentucky. And then in 1825, he married his daughter. So James Montgomery then was James Eddington Montgomery O'Hara's father-in-law of Montgomery County, Kentucky. James then Eddington Montgomery O'Hara then initially settled in Illinois, and they did not find it to their liking, and they ended up moving. A long story about how they ended up in the Brick Chapel area. If you want to pause and read it, you can. I like to go to the newspapers. A lot of fun, a lot of interesting information. Here's one in 1854 from I.H. Drake, physician surgeon, says for Dr. H. E. Chicago, having permanently located at the Brick Chapel, offers his professional services to the surrounding neighbors. It's 1854. There's another interesting article that came up in the research, 1866, very tragic story. A young man named Andrew Wood, son of the late William Wood, living in the neighborhood of Brick Chapel, accidentally shot himself previous Monday evening by blowing into the muzzle of a gun while endeavoring to hold the trigger with his foot. His foot slipped and the gun was discharged, killing him instantly. Very sad story. I love to read baseball stories. Baseball in 1869 was becoming very popular. Then again, 1880, various stories, very cool. Baseball spells two separate words at the time, pronounced two words, not like we do now. It's baseball. Where the Red Stockings Juniors went to Sugar Grove to play a match with the Plowboys. I say Sugar Grove, interesting came out that just east of Brick Chapel, there was a large sugar grove just at the bottom of the hill, and a lot of the locals noted that. It's very interesting, and that's probably where it got its name. So it's a Sugar Grove, which is really the foot of Brick Chapel, probably where the playing field was. Play a match with the Plowboys who failed to appear. Then the Red Stockings went to Brick Chapel and played against the 9 picked out of the Actives and the Plowboys. There's the score. You can read kind of a who's who of the people at the time. And then in 1880, a game of baseball against the Athletic Juniors of Greencastle and Active Juniors of Brick Chapel was played. Very lively game, apparently. Ended up with a score of 38-37. They're going to have a return game, of course. And then here's the Postmasters, Brick Chapel. They had a post office beginning 1873. Post office discontinued shortly thereafter, but then reinstated just a year later. Then here's a various listing of the postmasters up to the time it was discontinued. Mail sent to Greencastle 1904, shortly after the rural free delivery service of the mails was instituted. You can pause if you'd like to read all the postmasters. Well, I hope you've enjoyed hearing some of the early founding of the Brick Chapel area. I hope you return. We'll proceed next time with some other tiny towns and Venice villages of Putnam County.